welcome to the E-Force was a podcast, another episode, and I have Jim and Cathy here. They are two paleontologists from the DC area. So if you guys can give me a little bit of background about yourself, we'll get started.
She's pointing to me. I'm Jim Clark, Dr. James Clark from George Washington University. I study mainly fossil archosaurs, especially fossil crocodilians. I've worked on theropod dinosaurs when I worked with the American Museum of Natural History in Mongolia for about 10 years. And we collected a lot of theropod dinosaurs, and Mark Morell and I and Pete Makovicki developed a kind of what at that time was the state-of-the-art approach to the origin of birds and the big data set. Cathy?
So I'm Cathy Forster. I'm also at George Washington University. So I'm a professor and I teach geology and I teach paleontology. So on Monday, actually, this next week, I'll start teaching paleontology. But I work on dinosaurs mainly, work on the herbivorous dinosaurs, the ornithischian dinosaurs. Although I've worked a little bit on bird origins as well, so we have a little bit of an overlap there. Done a lot of field work in Madagascar and South Africa, a little bit in China, and here and there. So Jim and I have worked together in China in more recent years, and Mongolia 1 year. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So basically, in layman terms, for all the village idiots, it's crocodiles and birds and herbivores. So you have like your ceratops and stuff like that. Not the meat eaters. Not these guys.
I
Yeah.
don't usually work on the meat eaters.
Yeah. Okay.
Although, with paleontology, since we both do a lot of field work, so we go out in the field and we actually dig things up, you never know what you're going to find. So
Right.
sometimes, you work on what you find, so there's a lot of serendipity in this as well.
Sure.
So I tend to specialize in the ornithischian dinosaurs. Jim tends to specialize in the crocodilians and the theropod or the meat-eating dinosaurs, but you work on what you find. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever like been out there and found something that you were like, wait, this isn't like I don't even recognize not that you wouldn't recognize it, but it's not like in your kind of wheelhouse type thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all the time.
Really?
I did
Yeah.
so I found this site in Mexico years ago when I was a grad student. I just, on a lark, went down to Mexico and got permission and found this great site in the Sierra Madre Oriental.
Wow.
And so we found a lot of small things, and one of them was just this never before discovered group of reptiles. It was a burrowing animal. We had several skulls of this thing, so you could tell from the skull that they were burrowing with their head, and it was just a totally new group of animals. And
Wow.
so it was fun to study that and try and figure out. It was kind of distantly related to lizards and things like that.
Really? So how does one first of all, like you said, you just on a whim go to Mexico. How do you get permission, or is it kind of like ask for forgiveness, or no? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission type situation.
Well, so, as paleontologists, we're very sensitized to the fact that you just don't go to another country and grab fossils and leave.
True.
So, always we make sure we get permission, because if you don't get permission, if you publish on
Yeah.
it, then you're just in deep doo.
Yeah. Especially if you find something amazing,
Yeah, I mean,
can't
what's
do
the
nothing with
point?
it.
Yeah, you don't want to jeopardize that.
So
Right?
I was a grad student at University of Chicago, and I'd been working in northern Arizona in early Jurassic sediments there, basically on the Navajo reservation,
Wow.
and I'd done a lot of research on where were the other early Jurassic sediments in North America at the time, and there was this little thing on the geological maps that just said, late Triassic or early Jurassic terrestrial rocks. And no one had ever found anything there before. And I said, well, let's take a look. So
Yeah.
being a grad student, I just said, yeah, let me go down and do that. And so I drove. I had the first car I ever had was a 1967 Toyota Land Cruiser.
Oh my god.
So I drove. This would have been 83, 82 or 83 when I drove down. And so I just drove down, camp out at night and, on the side of the road, wherever.
Wow.
And actually, I went to a meeting in Mexico City, met up with a paleontologist who I'd written to, and I said, I want to do this. Can I get permission? He gave me a letter, and he he didn't take me too seriously, I think. And then drove up actually with a friend, Rich Cefelli, who was at that meeting. We drove up. We went to a bunch of places in the mountains, the Sierra Madre Oriental, and it didn't look very good at all. And then we came to this canyon that actually had really nice rock exposures. And after the first day or so, well, the end of the first day, I found what I thought were fossil bones, and then the next day, I found what I was sure were fossil bones.
Yeah.
And so that was very exciting.
So how, like when you're digging for things, because I obviously like my knowledge of this is Jurassic Park. That's it. That's all I got. That's all I got for you. So like, you see like the big bones and you see like the tents and like all the stuff. Is that actually how it goes down?
Kind of.
It can be. Camps really differ depending upon where you are and
Yeah.
how many people are there. But it usually involves tents, yes.
Yeah.
What is definitely not true is the beginning of the first Jurassic Park. They have this
Oh, yeah.
whole thing about using sonic waves to
Yeah.
visualize what's underground, and that's like almost never done.
Really?
Oh
Yeah.
no! I mean, first of all, it's expensive, and second of all, it's doesn't work unless you know there are bones
That there's,
underneath
yeah,
where
yeah,
you're
exactly.
looking. And so yeah, that was unrealistic. But it was interesting. I looked into that once, and the technology, at least at the time I was looking into it, was driven by people looking for landmines, and
Oh, wow.
that's kind of where
Yeah.
that kind of underground imaging, because yeah, it's really hard to do.
Yeah. No, I
I
can
think
imagine.
it's used more in like archaeology where you have a site, right?
Ah,
So you have a limited area where you're looking. In paleontology, you tend to be just walking for miles and
Yeah.
miles and miles looking for bones that are weathering out. And, sometimes over really rough terrain. And so that kind of thing just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it's just not working.
so it's a lot of guesswork almost.
You just find the right kinds of rocks, and then usually these things are very rare, so you don't, you just have to walk until you find some, and so you have to get good at recognizing what does a bone look like when it's weathering out a rock. It doesn't
Right.
look like a nice, discrete bone. It looks
Yeah.
like a bunch of little bone fragments, and you got to recognize, what's bone versus what's rock, and
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
fun. It's really it's
Yeah.
a great experience.
And that's the first part of working in the field and excavating dinosaurs. You have to find them first, or any fossil really. You got to find them. So in some rock formations, it's pretty easy. There's a lot of fossils. In other formations, you can walk for days before you find something. So it just takes a lot of walking and looking and having that search image,
Sure.
that search image so you know what you're looking for, you know what the bone looks like, because bone will be different colors, for example, in different formations.
Definitely.
So you have to have that search image, and that can take a little while to get. Some people are really good at it, like him. He's really good at finding stuff in the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
disagree.
Yeah.
But I was going to say what's really important is, I mean, each kind of rock will be different too. So the rock in Mexico, one reason no one had ever found anything there was it was really hard rock, so it didn't even erode as dusty soil or anything
Oh,
like that. It
wow.
was just bare red rock, and there were all these little green things in it that were not fossils, and then occasionally one of these little green things was a fossil, and so you'd have to be able to recognize, sort of cross sections of little bones, and
Sure.
it's just
So you have to eliminate a lot of other things that definitely are not fossils. And then some people would probably give up and just be like, oh, well, it's not here. You got to
Yeah.
keep digging.
there are a lot of
Persistence is really important.
I was going to
yeah,
say,
a lot
yeah.
of things also, you're outside, and so there's everything that's living outside is dying and lying on the ground too. So
That's
you
true.
find bones of cows and things like that.
Yeah. You're like,
And
oh my
lots of
God,
insects and
a T-Rex.
Snakes.
Yeah, snakes. Yeah.
So,
So that could be confusing. Um,
Snakes.
I was going to say, yeah, you did, I was going to ask I always find it fascinating when I'm terrified of alligators or crocodiles and stuff like that. But when you look at them, I mean, even now, they literally look like dinosaurs. Like if there was I don't know what dinosaurs look like, obviously in real life, but they're just scaly. They just look like old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they look prehistoric.
well, they look more like dinosaurs than anything else living around.
Yes,
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. But
that's what I mean.
actually,
Except for chickens.
but what's really interesting about crocodilians is they're not these relics of the age of dinosaurs because they ancestrally, kind of, if you go back into the Triassic, basically, they were these big land animals that were actually a lot more dinosaur-like, and then they secondarily they evolved this semi-aquatic existence they have now.
Really?
They have all these adaptations to living in water. There's all kinds of things closing their openings in their skulls. They got muscles closing their noses, muscles closing their ears. Yeah. Anyways, they're highly adapted to the water, which is
Wow.
all something that crocodilians evolved after they split off from kind of where the origin of dinosaurs, basically.
So were they standing up at one point?
Yes. Well, not on two legs, you mean?
Yeah.
No. There may have been, some things. Yeah, there may have been one or two that actually did, but mainly they were kind of these big four-legged things that would. They had their legs underneath their body. So living crocodilians are basically kind of paddling.
Yeah, they're like literally
Right.
like
Yeah, yeah.
And if on the land they're kind of spreading their arms up, but these old Triassic things, they had their legs were under the body. They were runners. They were real fast runners, as far as we could tell. I mean,
wow.
it's hard to measure the running speed of these
course.
things, but still, they were much more like dinosaurs.
Yeah, really long-legged, really interesting.
Yeah.
Not what you see today.
No.
And if you saw one, you probably wouldn't even realize it was a crocodilian.
Wow.
They're so different.
That's so cool. I would have never thought. I literally thought that like, oh, well, that's what they looked like 65 million years ago.
No.
Wow.
Well, 65 million, yeah, but not 200 million years ago.
Oh, 200 million?
Yeah. 250.
What period is that?
Triassic.
Triassic.
So,
That's before Jurassic.
Yes.
yeah, before the Jurassic. So, yeah, a lot happened in the Triassic that kind of set up everything that went on after that.
Really?
The
'Cause
dinosaur
I
extinction.
feel like most people, they only know 65 million years ago.
Yeah.
No one ever's like 200 million. You know what I mean? Like, that's not like a talked about.
Right.
Is it because the dinosaurs weren't as sexy?
No, it's
You know what I mean? Like,
No, a lot of it is because we have a really good fossil record from about 65 to 75 million years ago. Really good.
Yeah.
And as you go back, the fossil record just isn't that good. So we know a lot more, Triceratops, T-Rex. We know a lot of things from right at that time.
That makes sense.
Yeah, at the end of dinosaurs.
But I think a lot of things you might think are that age are not also. So like big Allosaurus, most of the big sauropods are from the late Jurassic. We actually have great Jurassic dinosaurs in the Rocky Mountains,
Really?
especially lots of these big sauropods. What's called Brontosaurus, which is now a legitimate name, hadn't been legitimate for a while.
Went back to Brontosaurus. Yeah.
Things like that.
That's interesting.
So in the Triassic, when you get the first dinosaurs, there's a lot of other stuff around too.
Yeah.
So early crocodilians, the earliest mammals, right? They're around in the late Triassic. So there's all this evolution going on in the late Triassic, lots of stuff. And then a lot of it goes extinct at the very end of the Triassic, and dinosaurs make it through, and the crocodilians make it through, and a few other groups. There's kind of a filter at the end of the Triassic there. And then there's this big explosion of dinosaur evolution in the
Yeah.
Jurassic.
And
That
that's
makes
what-
sense.
That's what really drives the
Yeah.
research too. We're not just like, oh, I want a new dinosaur. That's not
Yeah.
kind of what a scientist does. We're interested in how did the faunas change? How did each of the living groups of animals, how did they originate? How did they evolve? And so the Triassic, you just trace all these things back: lizards, turtles, crocodilians, birds.
Yeah.
They all end up back in the Triassic. And
Wow.
and then during the age of dinosaurs, they each kind of did their thing for a while. Then dinosaurs, except for birds, went extinct, and then we get another kind of radiation of the modern
Yeah.
things.
And that kind of drives research too. So that's one of the reasons that Jim wanted to start the work in Western China that we've been doing, is because the rocks there were of a particular age, kind of earlier in the Jurassic, and we didn't know much about the animals at that time. So you know a lot about what's happening in the end of the Jurassic,
Yeah.
but not much about what's happening before then. So sometimes that drives where you want to go, and what you want to look for is the particular time period where you don't know much, right?
Yeah.
Let's try to fill in the gap.
Yeah. Fill in the gaps. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that like, because I don't know how many dinosaurs there were. Let's just keep it at 65 million years, right? Because that's when we know the most, I guess. Um, I'm thinking, is it like they're running around like millions of them, or is it like there's like four Triceratops, there's like 10 T-Rexes? You know what I mean? Is there like a limited amount of them, or is it like how animals are today, where they're just everywhere?
I'm sure they were everywhere. We don't have records of them everywhere
Ah,
because we don't necessarily have rocks of that age preserved everywhere or exposed everywhere. But I'm sure they were everywhere by the end of the Cretaceous
Yeah.
or before then.
Well, there are fossils in Antarctica. There are fossils everywhere.
Yeah,
You look at
on the north slope of Alaska.
the
I
north
mean,
slope of Alaska.
Wow.
Everywhere.
everywhere where you find rocks of that age, there are dinosaurs.
We don't know. They were everywhere. They're diverse. How many were in one spot at one time is harder to tell.
Yeah.
There are some deposits where you get kind of there's been some flood and it's killed everything in one event, and you can say, oh well, there were at least 100 centrosaurs here
Yeah.
at this time. But
Sure.
it's a hard thing to get to get at is exactly how big were there even herds of these things?
Right.
How big was a herd?
Yeah,
of
how
these
big
things?
was the population?
How big was the
It's
population?
it's really hard to get at. It's really hard to understand that.
yeah. No, I can imagine. Like that's why I asked, because last night when I was watching Jurassic Park, Sam Neill goes, they are in herds. They do
Yeah.
migrate in herds. It's like, how do you like?
Yeah, migration's another
Yeah.
pretty tricky thing.
Yeah.
That's tricky.
Because I know that like Utah, Colorado, Montana are like big spots for like big dinosaurs that I've seen. You know, I mean, Dinosaur 13, the documentary, obviously, about that, like the T-Rex that they found in Montana.
Right.
Like how, like if you find one T-Rex in Montana, did everybody go crazy trying to find other ones, I guess?
There's quite a few that are known. It's not
Yeah.
like they're incredibly rare. There's
Really?
a fair amount. Like
Well-
Triceratops, there's dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of not complete skeletons,
Sure.
but pieces. So
Yeah.
they're not uncommon in that particular formation at that particular time.
Wow.
But T-Rex, it's just the iconic dinosaur, and you definitely want to find it. People know it and can visualize it and just are fascinated with it.
Yeah.
So they were first found. The first ones were found, just after the beginning of the 20th century, and then there just wasn't that much activity. There's been a lot of fossil collecting in the last 20, 30 years, a lot more than there had been, earlier in the last century. And T-Rex is something people really want. If you find a T-Rex, you dig it up.
Yeah.
If you find a crappy Triceratops, you may not dig it up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just.
I'd dig it up.
Yeah. I'm saying somebody would do it.
But T-Rex is just, and also, unfortunately, if you find it on private land too, I mean, you can sell it to whoever.
Wow. So you don't, it's because that documentary, I didn't watch it, but like the government came in and like, oh, this is native land. This is ours now. I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one that just
That's a long, complicated story.
long, complicated.
yeah, that was
But
crazy.
that reset the whole.
Yeah.
That basically was a huge advertisement for, hey, you can make money.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, that's what I got from the trailer. Well,
That also gets back to what we were talking about before with field work is, you have to make sure you have the right permits and
Right.
right permission wherever you dig.
sure.
So if it's on public land, you need the correct permits. If you're in another country, you have to make sure you have everything in line. You have all your permits in line, and it's best to work with people in the country as
Yeah,
well.
that know.
Paleontologists in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Each country is different, but also we're, in a situation, we're at a university that doesn't have collections. And so that would be different if I was a curator at a museum and I needed to add to the collections.
Right.
And so I don't need to, so I don't care where
Yeah.
the fossils end up. In fact, I'm fine with them staying. I'm happy with them staying in the countries that we work in.
Yeah.
And that works fine for me. We get to study them. Don't have to worry about curating specimens and the like. But museums, there's a bit of pressure on curators to actually collect things that stay in their own collections.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah, that's like part two of going out and digging up any kind of fossil is then what happens to it, right?
yeah,
You want to make sure it's in a legitimate collection where it'll be cared for,
sure.
right, in perpetuity, and that other researchers can come and look at it, or it can be put on display for the public. So, not only do you have to plan where you want to go and make sure you have the permits and all the equipment and the people and everything you need to do the excavation, but then you have to have a place to put those fossils once you're finished with them.
Like a museum. A museum would be like an ideal situation.
Yes,
Yeah, museum.
yeah. And museums cost money, and museums are, they don't do well during economic downturns,
No.
and sometimes they have to give up their collections, and there's all this.
Really?
Yeah, it's very sad. We like museums a lot, and we like people to support museums.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
museums
spend
are
a lot
awesome.
of time in museums.
No, I bet you did. Yeah. Well, didn't you work at the National Museum of History and American too?
He,
Did-
he
Well,
was
so
yeah.
I had postdoctoral fellowships at both the Smithsonian
Yeah.
National Museum and then the American Museum. I was there for 3 years back when we went back to Mongolia. So in fact,
Yeah.
I almost got a job there as the dinosaur curator, but my friend Mark beat me out.
And I worked at the Field Museum in Chicago
right.
for 2 or 3 wonderful years.
Yeah.
It was fabulous.
Yeah. Museums are, especially living in DC, you got the Smithsonian, you got like a lot of really cool stuff. And like, I know they were working on it like probably like 2 or 3 years ago when I went, the new dinosaur exhibit at one of the,
Yeah.
did they finish it? And like, are those like actual fossils or are those like fake?
Well, it's a mix because it's hard to mount a real, the real bones in a dynamic pose.
Sure.
And so they generally, if you have a rearing dinosaur or something, that's usually cast. So it's fake in that it's a cast of a real thing, but it's a cast.
Yeah, it's a copy.
But there's pressure on them to show the real things. I mean, that's why you come to a museum.
Right.
And so, but they did a great job. Our friend Matt Carano, who's the curator in charge of that,
Yeah.
he did a great job.
Yeah.
We think.
Yeah, I went when they were.
Beautiful.
It's awesome. When I went, it was like under construction, and even like during under construction, they made it like this thing. It was really, really cool. Yeah, that was really fun. What?
The thing I liked is architecturally they opened that hall back up. So now they open
Yeah.
the windows up
Oh,
and you
cool.
can see some of the original architecture now, which is really, I find that really stunning.
Yeah, I didn't even know that area was back there in the
Yeah.
museum. It
Yeah,
just like
'cause they've
popped
been all
up.
covered up, right?
Yeah,
For years. It's a much more attractive exhibit than it was before.
Yeah.
yeah. No,
Well,
it looks awesome.
So I was at the American Museum in New York when they were renovating their dinosaur halls.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was just amazing to watch. I mean, that's a whole floor of that giant museum.
Yeah,
And the problem
Yeah.
they ran into, they opened up their the old sides of the exhibits, but they ran into the issue that so it had been renovated in the 1930s where they'd covered up all this older
wow.
architecture, and they had to get permission because the 1930s renovation was actually now historic.
Oh
and so
my
they had to
gosh.
destroy the historic 1930 renovation to get back to the 19
A renovation that's historic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
That's weird.
it was ugly too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, 1930s. Like, let's appreciate the actual museum.
The ugliness, yeah.
Yeah, the ugliness, exactly. Did you guys okay, I know like after Jurassic Park came out, there was probably a big boom of people wanting to go find dinosaurs. Before that, why did you guys get in? Like, how did you find yourself being like, you know what? I want to go do this. How did that happen?
Well, I was one of those little kids who I think I was 4 and I got a set of toy dinosaurs for Christmas. And I still have them. And I was a little kid who wanted to study dinosaurs when I grew up. And then I grew up and I never lost it. Usually, kids, they get to be about, 8 or 9 and they start having other, they kind of forget about the dinosaurs. But I never did, so.
And that led you all the way.
And
Yeah.
paleontology, and I
she has
just
a
continued with it
she's got a picture of herself with a tiny little toy triceratops
in my dinosaur
in
books.
her
Yeah.
dinosaur books. And I was
Wow.
very fortunate when I was in high school in Los Angeles. I was in Long Beach, California, and the Los Angeles Museum had a program where you could take classes from curators on the weekend.
Oh, cool.
And so on Saturdays, we'd go and take classes, and then we got to. It turned out you could hang out in the paleontology lab and help out. And so, who wouldn't want to do
Yeah,
that?
right.
So
Yeah.
take a class in the afternoon. And so some friends and I who were doing that, we just said, oh, why don't we go out and find our own fossils? So the three of us would go out in the Mojave Desert or wherever. We just ask the
Oh, cool.
curators, say, where can we find fossils? And this is back in the 70s. And they'd say, oh, go out here, go to Barstow. And so we would. And so, yeah, the other friends, one of them was Mark Norrell. So he's now the curator of dinosaurs at the American Museum in New York. And
Wow.
then the other guy became disillusioned eventually, but he was in charge of um, field exploration for ExxonMobil. So he got his geology degrees, and
Wow.
he did okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds.
So, I mean, that gets back to the importance of museums, right? The
Yeah.
importance of their programs, and I mean, that was really instrumental in you
Well, I
getting
always
into
think of
that.
it, and I think this is true of a lot of kids growing up, and it's basically you see somebody who has a job doing something like
Yeah.
this, and it's like, wow, you can get
Yeah.
paid.
You get money for
You
that?
get
What?
paid to do that, and it
Yeah.
was like, oh, okay, well, there's a career direction I'll consider.
Yeah.
Exactly. I can work in an office all the time, or
Yeah.
maybe
Wait.
I
Wait a
can
minute.
Yeah,
go to exotic places and dig
yeah.
up
Let's see.
dinosaurs. I'll
Yeah.
take that.
Yeah. No, they'll take that all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. What's like your biggest? I know you said in Mexico, but what was Kathy? What was like your thing that you were like, holy shit, like like I found this like amazing thing.
Probably my work in Madagascar. And like the first year or two there, we found just incredible stuff. We were finding theropod and sauropod, the long-necked dinosaur fossils, and I think we were talking about this before too. Is I hadn't worked on theropods or sauropods before. There were no plant-eating dinosaurs to be seen, and I
Yeah.
didn't know what I was seeing. Right?
Really?
I'd find these skull pieces of a sauropod dinosaur, and they looked so bizarre. I didn't even know what they were, but that first year we were there, we found this wonderful fossil that turned out to be something that kind of walks the line between theropods and birds, and it's Rahu navis. So that I think was one of the most exciting finds that I've ever been involved in.
Wow. And that was
That
before
was
you
really
really got
fun.
into like the herbivore stuff. You were just finding them.
Oh, I was into the herbivores before then, but again, that's what we found, right? We
Yeah.
didn't
Oh yeah.
find
Yeah.
any herbivores, so you work with what you find. So I learned a lot about sauropod dinosaurs and a lot about birds and theropod dinosaurs that I hadn't known before, which is another great thing. You work on the stuff you find that's different from what you've studied,
Sure.
and you're constantly learning new stuff. You're
Yeah.
constantly learning new things. So
What are you
it's,
guys doing today? Like, are you guys still going out in the field and like digging and all that stuff?
Oh, I wish.
yeah.
Lately I've been working in China. Well, actually, not lately, for the last
Wait,
20
wait,
years.
what?
So, in China,
Not lately, though.
Yeah, not
yeah,
like
the
lately
place.
yesterday.
Not lately.
So
Yeah.
we're actually, been working in kind of a semi-tropical part too, which is even worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that didn't happen, and yeah, we're just staying at home, but which has been great. I mean, I know
Yeah.
it's hurt a lot of people, but we get to hang with our kids, and
Yeah.
we like working around the house, so we've been working on projects around the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're able to like teach too, virtually.
Yeah. Well, we've been teaching virtually for like 8 years. We have an online course we teach in the summer, and so we've kind of gotten the hang of it.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, this wasn't any big deal to switch.
Yeah, yeah. Are you guys seeing like a lot of your students like you're about to teach paleontology on Monday, right? You said.
Yeah.
So like how does that go? Like what do you teach them? Do you just have like conversations about like the Jurassic era? You know what I mean? Like what like
Well, it's sort of like just teaching live in that we all get on sort of like a Zoom call where we're
sure.
all together and I can share a PowerPoint presentation, right? So I can basically lecture online to them. They can come in with questions if they have. So it's not all that different from teaching live. I expect it might be a little harder to have discussions
Sure.
online, but I can still present a lecture online without any problem.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then so the I know you said earlier that like pretty much everything went kind of extinct except for birds.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, when the dinosaurs went extinct, a lot of things went extinct, but obviously mammals didn't, and turtles and lizards, and the things that are alive today,
Yeah.
somehow, they made it through. But, you know, it was mainly the dinosaurs, other than birds, and then a bunch of marine reptiles, and then a few things. I mean, each group, so there were mammals that went extinct, there were lizards that went extinct. Um, Oh, and pterosaurs, pterodactyls, and things like that.
Oh
They went
man,
extinct. Yeah,
I know.
but it
pterodactyls
was
are
really
cool.
mainly. I mean, it's interesting too because it was clear. You had all the theropods, all the theropods with birds, all the sauropods, all
Yeah.
these ornithischians go extinct, and then right after that, you get these radiations of birds and mammals, especially placental mammals. I mean, they just kind of exploded, over the course of millions of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was clear, the dinosaurs were kind of keeping these things down. Because as soon as they go extinct, these other things really just go wild.
Yeah. Whatever makes it through one of these big extinctions has a lot of opportunity, right?
Sure.
A lot of opportunity for evolution. So that's what happens after all these events.
You said chickens too. What? I don't.
Chickens, birds. So
Okay.
birds,
Okay.
birds are a branch of theropod dinosaurs. So that's one branch of dinosaurs that didn't go extinct. So dinosaurs are not extinct because we still have the birds. And of course, they have this huge evolution and a lot of changes, right, from their kind of more dinosaur-y ancestors. But
Sure.
birds are dinosaurs. Look at their legs. They still have dinosaur legs.
That's crazy. I don't even
Yeah.
think of it like that. I think of a chicken. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm about to
Yeah.
some barbecue. Yeah.
Yeah. So we keep chickens. We just like to have our little theropods in the backyard. Our own
Like
little
we got
dinosaurs
dinosaurs. Like you set up like a nice little exhibit.
that give us eggs. So
Yeah. That's cool. So do you think that it would be possible? Because I know there was like, I don't know when it was, but I read something about like the woolly mammoth. I know that's not like Jurassic era, but like they were trying to like get the DNA from this woolly mammoth that was still
Right.
preserved and then
Right.
recreate it.
Yeah. That's very plausible because woolly
Really?
mammoths were not much different from basically the Indian elephants.
yeah,
And so genetically, yeah, I mean, it's plausible that they could do that. But
yeah.
dinosaurs, whoa. I mean, first of all, there's no DNA known from that period. DNA doesn't last that long. There some inklings there might be some DNA, but you need more than a few
A
bits of.
fragment. Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, yeah, it's just very, very, very unlikely we'll ever
yeah.
resurrect a dinosaur.
Well, the last mammoths only went extinct like 4, 5 thousand years ago,
That's
and
it?
they have frozen material,
Yeah.
so they can extract good DNA from something that's that recent and so closely related to something that's still alive. But we don't have that case for dinosaurs.
No.
Wow. So there's no mosquito that's covered with.
No, I mean the whole Jurassic Park thing. So it was preserved in amber,
Yeah.
and it turns out amber wasn't that great at preserving chemicals. I mean, people have tried. Like right around Jurassic Park, there were reports of DNA out of amber, of insect DNA out of amber, and nobody's ever replicated it.
Oh my God.
It's
Could
a
you
real
imagine?
clever idea, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Crichton had a very clever idea there.
well,
It's
it
just
wasn't
not
his idea.
well. Okay.
He picked up on a good idea.
He wrote it. Yeah.
He wrote a good
He
idea.
wrote a good idea.
Yeah,
That's so funny.
exactly. I wish I'd have written that.
I know, right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Steven
What am I
Spielberg.
thinking?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So it's plausible for the mammoth because I didn't even know 4 or 5 thousand. Obviously, that's a long ass time ago, but compared to 65 million,
Compared to 200 million, it's
Not-
like a drop in the bucket.
yeah,
65.
Yeah.
But it's also basically, any of these things that are preserved in, ice Well,
Yeah.
although actually it turns out ice is not necessarily the best way for preserving tissues, but it's not bad.
It's better than, yeah,
Better
Yes,
than none at all.
better
yeah,
than none at all. But
Yeah.
yeah, you know, fossil humans.
right.
You could have your Neanderthals, possibly.
That would be crazy.
That's I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, no, that would be that's yeah. Neanderthals are no joke. The oh, man, the I'm just trying to think of like the 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 200 million years ago. It still kills me because I like never even thought like you hear like what the meteorite that took out the dinosaurs, the big all these
Yeah.
things. Like I don't even I just want to talk a little bit more about that period because I think that's such an interesting thing because I did not know that and
Yeah.
I don't know a lot already. So, I mean, I think it's so what you're saying is 200 million, like all those dinosaurs and living creatures kind of filtered out into the end of the dinosaurs at 65 million years.
Dinosaurs lasted a long time. So they,
Yeah.
they originated, 240, 250 million years ago, and then they
Yeah.
went extinct at 65. So, they were around a lot longer than humans have been.
Yeah.
So,
Then primates have been
yeah,
around.
primate. I mean, it was a hugely successful group for,
Wow. That is crazy.
Well, they're
over
still
100 million
hugely
years.
successful,
Yeah, and they're
right?
still hugely successful.
Birds are hugely successful. They're everywhere. So dinosaurs are still very successful.
I
So
just,
when you say something's a dinosaur, it's actually a compliment, right?
yeah, right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not some old extinct thing that was unsuccessful. Very, very successful group of organisms.
Where do you think they came from?
Well, so the closest relatives of birds are crocodilians, and basically all the dinosaurs are closer to birds than they are to crocodilians. So it's basically you're looking at kind of what's the common ancestor of crocodilians and birds. And there are a bunch of things back in the early Triassic, and then you kind of go into the Permian, and they basically, were these kind of big, sprawling, kind of like a croc that's not aquatic. These land-dwelling things. They're more like a giant lizard,
It's terrifying.
just in terms of what they looked like.
Yeah.
But some are very small, some
Yeah.
are bigger.
Yeah.
Nothing back then reached the size that dinosaurs got, like in the late Jurassic, when you have these gigantic, brachiosaurs
Oh, really?
and brontosaurs. So early on, everything's pretty reasonable sized. It's not until you get into the Jurassic where you really start getting really big animals, where size starts really increasing.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I literally thought that they were all like that big all the time.
There's a long, interesting history of dinosaurs, and that's what keeps us going.
Yeah.
It's, you find, things that fit into this period there where we don't
Yeah.
know what's happening.
Yeah.
And a lot of dinosaurs aren't big. So, people usually think of these gigantic things like Triceratops is a big animal, Tyrannosaurus is a huge predator, duck-billed dinosaurs are big, the sauropods are big, but there's a lot of smaller members of these groups and other groups too. So, they're not all gigantic. And I think, at least in the past, a lot of the fossil record that we know of tend to be bigger animals because people haven't really looked for those small things.
Yeah, if you want to fill a museum exhibit, you don't fill it with the.
That's true.
People want to see the big things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
from our perspective, I don't want to find a giant dinosaur that's going to take me 5 years to collect.
Wow.
I want to find something I can collect in, a day or two.
Really?
So I can collect.
Or in one season.
Yeah, I can collect 20 dinosaurs in a field season.
20
if they're small.
actual dinosaurs?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it depends on where you are. I mean, in
Wow.
Mexico, we didn't find that many.
Yeah.
But in Western China, we found a lot. So, yeah. But there are other things made me think of in China, that one of the greatest collections, greatest fossil sites in general, has been what you call the feathered dinosaur beds, where they found these fossil deposits all through northeastern China, so not where we were, where if you kind of split these shales, you get these skeletons, and they'll have soft tissues, including feathers. So you get dinosaurs with feathers. And
What?
all of these are relatively small things, so there aren't too many big things in these deposits. But
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the really interesting evolution in the origin of birds was taking place with these smaller things. And so you get these just spectacular skeletons where they have beautiful feathers, and we can even it's thought that we can figure out the color of the feathers from
Yeah.
the pigment cells that are
Yeah.
on them.
And some of these guys are like, this big.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're really little, and then there's some bigger ones. But
Yeah, yeah.
there's tiny, tiny little dinosaurs out there. But you got to look for them. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
They're a little harder to find
I was
than
gonna say, yeah.
Brachiosaurus.
Yeah. But
So you really have to, again, we get back to that search image. You
Yeah.
really have to know what you're looking for and to pay attention to the small stuff as well. Because it's just as interesting as the big stuff.
yeah.
Sure.
So our main collaborator in China is Xu Sheng, whom I've known for years and years. He's the main guy studying these. So whenever I go to China, I go to his office, and it's like, oh, what do you got now? It's just like like a birthday party. It's
Yeah.
like, look at this.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
this.
Here you go,
And
Jim.
there's
Yeah.
just all these new dinosaurs,
Yeah.
and they'll have added as feathers, and it's just amazing.
And they found feathers. When was that? It was like it was a new thing because they thought.
First,
Yeah.
in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Whoa.
They found these kind of really simple feathers on something. And so what happened was they realized that there were these really cool animals in these shales. And so everybody in that area started digging them up to sell them. And so, and then the Chinese government, because of the restrictions, they basically pressured them to sell them to scientific institutions, but there is a kind of black market on these things as well. But so the scientists don't have as much time as some poor guy living there who's learned how to dig and lives year round in Liaoning. So so they just constantly are digging these things up.
Wow,
And,
that's crazy.
it's
That's recent.
Just
In the
amazing
late
what they
90s?
A
dug up.
lot of them are just spectacular.
The late 90s was the first one, and it's been, basically the last 20 years have just been amazing in
Wow.
terms of, what they've
Yeah.
brought up.
But it's allowed us to know so much, learn so much about kind of the origin of birds
Sure.
and kind of these different theropod dinosaurs kind of that are closely related to the origin of birds. So we learned so much about it from these Liaoning fossils. And they're beautiful. They're just gorgeous.
Yeah. Totally different than anything anyone's found.
Well, actually, what's interesting is they're similar to things, but you can tell. Well, this thing looks a lot like Velociraptor, for example, which is something from Mongolia we've known for a long time, but it's got feathers.
Wow.
And so, and then these other things. So a lot of them were known. Those groups were known, but the diversity, they just added all these species,
Sure.
and all the soft tissues. And then as well, there are mammals there with hair. They're pterodactyls that have soft tissues. And
That's so cool. That is so cool. So they had did they have when did I guess scientists realize that that dinosaurs were closer to birds than they are? Because you would think you see them, they look like just giant lizards and reptiles and stuff like that, right? Like when did that happen?
It's a pretty old hypothesis, actually. It goes
Really?
back to
Huxley.
Huxley in the late 1800s.
Wow.
And then it kind of fell out of favor. And then with, the excavation of more specimens, especially Deinonychus, I guess, Ostran's Deinonychus,
What's that?
in the
It's a big-
60s, I believe,
Yeah,
it kind of got, well, let's look at this again.
right.
Here's some evidence. Maybe Huxley was right. Here's these new theropod specimens. Here are birds. Here's Archaeopteryx. Look at all the similarities here.
Yeah.
So it kind of got reinvigorated, and with finding more and more specimens through the 70s and the 80s, it became pretty obvious that birds were most closely related, actually descendants of a group of theropod dinosaurs.
It was actually, so John Ostrom, who was at Yale, found this big pile of dinosaurs in Montana, Deinonychus, which is a lot like Velociraptor, and
Yeah.
he studied it and he published on it. And then he happened to be looking at some, he was studying pterodactyls, and he was in
yeah.
Germany, And studying pterodactyl fossils, he realized one of them was actually an Archaeopteryx. So then he started looking at Archaeopteryx, this transitional bird, the ancestral bird, and he said, basically, wow, this is like a mini Deinonychus, a mini Velociraptor.
Yeah.
So he published this, phenomenal paper or two in the late 70s saying, look at all these similarities.
Sure.
And then people started doing analyses, and it was obvious, that
Yeah.
there was by far more evidence for that than for anything else.
That is crazy. Yeah, because the common person's not going to be like, oh, that's a bird, or that's a descendant from a
Yeah.
bird or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. The Velociraptor is obviously one of the more popular ones as well. Is it as it's depicted in stuff like that? Is it really kind of like that, like intelligent and has that little dew claw and like, you know what I mean? Like the stuff that like
Yeah.
makes
Well,
it
the
look really
anatomy's
cool.
okay.
It's got the
Yeah.
claw. It's definitely got the claw.
I mean, they had it. Their brains were relatively larger. They're very close. Velociraptor is very close to birds, and so there's an enlargement of the brain as you get into birds, which
Yeah.
have big brains. And so they did have that. Pack behavior. Who the heck knows?
I know, yeah, it's like clever girl.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
they probably weren't all that smart.
Yeah, right.
Like in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
They were probably as smart as my chickens, at least. And that's not very smart,
not
I can tell you.
That's right.
That's funny.
But, predators, from what I've seen of chickens and lizards, if you're a predator, you're pretty focused on prey, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's one, some of your brain cells are focused on prey. So I can see that part of it, but they certainly weren't as strong as they show in Jurassic Park.
Yeah. I know. Obviously,
Not
that's
as smart
definitely.
as they show in
Yeah,
Jurassic
that's definitely super fiction. Now, that makes me think, is what you just said, Jim, was like the closer you get to birds, the bigger the brain gets. So I would think, okay, a Tyrannosaurus Rex has a gigantic head. He should have a gigantic brain.
Well, not gigantic, no. So you have this thing called allometry, where as you grow, some parts of you get relatively bigger and some parts don't grow as fast. And brains are one of those things that just don't grow as fast as the rest of the body, and that's true of all brains. And so when you get these giant things, it's basically called negative allometry, where the brain is just not growing as fast. I mean, if you had a gigantic bird that was the size of T-Rex, its brain would be relatively, smaller than on a small bird.
Wow.
So the brain of T-Rex, and T-Rex is, kind of close to birds, but not nearly as close as Velociraptor. Its brain is not, significantly
Developed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
than
Yeah, and I've studied Triceratops extensively and Triceratops brains. And you know how big a Triceratops
Yeah,
is.
huge.
But its brain is about the size of this microphone.
What?
It's not a big brain in there. The animal's big, but the brain isn't necessarily big.
See, I would never think that. I would think the complete opposite of well, that makes sense that you say that now. That the bigger they are, the harder it is for something like a brain to grow to match the body. So, do you think that like the how do we even know about their brains though? Like, how do you? I mean, you don't get brains obviously when you dig for fossils.
No, but you have the cavity, right? The brain cavity. And so you can make like a copy of the inside of the brain cavity. And when you look
What?
inside a brain cavity, you can see where all like the nerves come off, the cranial nerves come off, how big they are. You can see where the carotid arteries come up,
What?
blood into the brain. So because all of that is enclosed by bone, as long as you have the bone, you can figure out what was inside of it.
Yeah.
Now, you know how big the brain cavity is. You don't know exactly how much of it was actually filled with brain material.
Sure.
There's other things in there. So that's the maximum size it could be. It could have been even smaller than that.
Yeah, there tends
Whoa.
to be like a big venous sinus on the back of the brains, and it's hard to sometimes tell how much of that is just a big vein.
Yeah, right.
But it's actually it's pretty easy to study these now with CT scans. So a lot of paleontology now is done with CT scans for various reasons. You can see things, the inside of the skull without actually having to dig it out.
And crack it open.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to then just say, well, this is what the inside of the brain case is.
That is incredible. I did not know that. That's obviously I didn't know that. I didn't. I didn't even know 200 million years ago. Um, do you see with like technology, obviously, are you guys using a lot of like when you do go out on digs and stuff like that, even the last 10, 20 years, do you see that kind of technology helping you, or is it still kind of like old school,
No.
like chisel?
In the field, it's pretty old school.
Yeah.
I think one of the changes I've heard people use is drones to like look
Yeah.
over like an excavation site and get good photos of sites. But otherwise, when you're out excavating, it's pretty much like it's always been done. It's with, picks and shovels and jackhammers
Oh my gosh.
and
Yeah.
burlap. That hasn't changed. What's changed is a lot what Jim's was saying when you get the fossils back,
Hmm.
right? It used to be you had to carefully prepare all the rock off of it to see anything. And sometimes there's areas where you just can't see, like into the brain case.
Sure.
But now you can run your fossil through a CAT scanner, which is like a three-dimensional X-ray, right?
Sure.
And put all the data into your computer, and you can digitally prepare the rock off of it and out of the inside of it.
Wow.
And you can digitally take the skull apart, you can look at the insides of things, you can trace blood vessels through bone, you can do all sorts of wonderful things. So technology has really helped in the study of the fossils. It hasn't helped a lot in actually getting them out of the ground, I don't think.
Well, not getting them out of the ground, but you were talking about drones. Satellite imaging
Yeah,
has
yeah.
really helped in, if you're out in the field and you're looking at these rocks, you say, where else can I go to see the same rocks? And you can't look over that hill very
Sure.
easily, so you end up driving everywhere. But these satellite images, you can say, oh, there's a spot here, there's a little outcrop of the same rock. You go over here, and, these little
Yeah.
outcrops could be, full of fossils. So that helped. I mean, I remember working in Mongolia. I went up to well, there was a satellite imaging firm in Rockville, and so no, in Wheaton. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I got these prints. So we had these gigantic prints of satellite images, and we take them out into the Gobi Desert. This is before you could look at things. There's certainly no internet that we could
Yeah. No.
avail ourselves of in the Gobi Desert at that time. So, but I had this gigantic photographic printout of a satellite image saying, I
Wow.
think I see some over here.
Yeah. Oh, there it is.
Over
Yeah.
there. It's so cool.
That's
But
cool.
technologically, what's like really coming along now are the biochemical investigations of finding fossils, finding these, it's not so much DNA. DNA doesn't preserve that well, but there are all these other chemicals that are preserved with fossils they're really, the techniques for identifying these are really, this is kind of just the beginning of a real flourishing of that technology.
Yeah. So it like cuts down on the time of having to find things versus like driving over that hill and finding the rock that looks like.
Satellite images, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. With the chemical stuff, though, that's just finding all these things that we didn't know. It's even potentially telling us more about physiology and
Yeah, yeah.
color and all these things.
Yeah.
So there's some really interesting things coming out with the chemistry of fossils once it's back in the lab.
That's cool. So you said color.
Yeah.
So you can find out like what a certain dinosaur maybe had looked like, possibly like color wise, for
Because
pigment.
Yeah.
first with the feathered dinosaurs, they would look for these little organelles, the melanosomes, which are preserved pigment or had pigment. They may not preserve it, but the shape of the organelle, the shape of that
And
melanosome would tell
size.
you, size and shape would tell you kind of which kind of pigment it had.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't tell you everything, but you could kind of tell a few things. And so there are reconstructions of these, striped feathers and all
Wow.
these interesting things. But there are other indications now where they get. So there are like these blue fossil eggs, and they've been able to tell that this is actually they actually have the chemical that made it blue, and it's the same chemical that's in blue
What?
in living birds. And it's things like that. I mean, that's these things are really being developed
Yeah.
in several different labs, and things are really moving along.
That's rad.
great. I never thought we'd ever be able to find out what the color
Color,
of something
right.
that's
Yeah.
65 million years old, but turns out we might be able to. So
That is
it's really
cool.
exciting. Yeah.
Because it's all a guessing game, right? But most people, when you see it in illustrations, you see it on any kind of, it's all kind
Yeah,
of
it's
guessing.
always just made up,
Yeah.
right? But now maybe we don't have to make it up anymore.
Wow. I
Yeah.
didn't
That's
even know
great.
that. I didn't even know it
No,
was made up like that. I thought they legit knew like what color the T-Rex was.
No.
You're like, no. God damn it, Corey. Oh man.
It's, I mean,
That's so cool.
if you, there are a lot of artists doing reconstructions of fossils, and if you do something, it's got to be some color, and
Sure. Yeah, right.
so they basically would guess. And
Wow.
or,
now
or
it's
they'd look at coloring in lizards
yeah,
Uh,
or something like that and put some kind of a pattern on it. But it was all
yeah,
just guesswork,
yeah,
right? And yeah, and everyone knew it, right? We don't know what color they were, but maybe now we will know what color they
that
were.
would be cool.
Yeah.
yeah.
That would be cool. What's I know you guys don't know probably I don't know if you do or not, but like sharks and stuff, are they prehistoric?
Are
Well,
they?
prehistoric. Yeah, I mean
Oh
sharks.
yeah, they go back.
They
They
go
go way
back
back. Yeah,
way back into the Paleozoic.
yeah,
But you know, it's the sort of thing where as you go back, things are going to look different than they are today. So
Sure.
modern sharks go back, I think,
yeah.
into
I don't know.
the Triassic or Jurassic.
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw like a video of this shark. It's like 300 years old or so, or no, 3,000. I don't know. It's like old as hell. It's like the oldest living like vertebrae. Are they vertebrae? Or
They're vertebrates.
yeah,
but yeah.
It's like the first group that branched off of vertebrates that have jaws.
yeah.
Whoa,
So the first jawed vertebrates kind of branched off. And
that's
Yeah, the
crazy.
earliest vertebrates didn't have jaws. So the earliest animals without backbones
yeah,
didn't have jaws.
like lampreys and hagfish.
Yeah,
And
They
things
didn't
like
have jaws.
no
yeah,
jaws.
yeah,
Yeah, they had mouths, right?
Yeah, but they just
There's
had
no
no.
there's no jaw in there. Yeah,
Whoa,
just soft tissue.
that's crazy. Did
I
like
know.
yeah, no, that's interesting. Sorry, I was just like curious because I saw this
I'll be
article the other
teaching
day.
about that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, all right, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
that's awesome. Um, as far as like, I know we don't know like where certain like herds or like kind of dinosaurs were. I don't know how like the planet looked back 200 million years ago. With like all the continents, were they together? Was it easy to migrate and go around and stuff like that? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
That's
actually
a
a
good
really
question.
interesting question because at the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, like in the end of the Triassic, all the continents are together. Then as we move to 65 million years ago, they're all pulling apart. So
Ah,
by the time you get to the end of age of dinosaurs, we have, the continents that we see today. So all this evolution of dinosaurs and everything else, not just dinosaurs, is kind of playing out on this division of the continents.
mm,
So early on, it was easy to move everywhere, not so easy to move everywhere late in time or late in the age of dinosaurs. So by the time we get to 65 million years ago, everything is separate.
wow.
So,
And then so as far as how it looked then, so there weren't any flowering plants until the Cretaceous. So back in the Jurassic and Triassic, it was all basically pine trees
yeah,
cycads and ferns, lots of ferns, and these things, the monkey puzzle trees that are
Whoa.
another kind of gymnosperm that are alive today. Their relatives are back there. So it was a different landscape, very
yeah.
different landscape.
But climate-wise, it was really warm throughout this whole time. It was nice and warm. There's no ice at the North or South Pole or anywhere. So it's very equable climate. That's why
Yeah.
we have dinosaurs and palm trees like in the Arctic Circle because it's just really warm.
Whoa.
Like right now, the planet's warming, but we're still really cold relative to what it's been in the past.
Yeah.
So it was really warm. It was really nice. It was a great time to
Be a
be a
dinosaur.
dinosaur.
Yeah.
Is it still a theory of like how they became extinct, or is it like a fact? Like with
Well,
the meteor and like yeah.
A lot of it, I'd say there's no doubt that there was a meteorite impact right at the time the dinosaurs went extinct.
maybe
So,
more than one.
yeah.
Yeah, they
Uh,
just found one 12 that dated like I think like under like a sheet of ice in Antarctica that dated back or a crater that dated back only like 12 to 11 or 12 million years ago.
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because when the dinosaur extinction story was first developed back in the early 80s, people hadn't paid that much attention to, where were the craters on Earth.
Right.
And
Right.
then they started looking, and there are some that were known. Meteor crater in Arizona, everybody knows. But once you start looking, for these subsurface things, because you can't actually see them on the surface, then they start finding all these things, and yeah, and that was an interesting time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People then tried to say, oh well, does this meteorite impact correlate with this extinction?
Sure.
Everyone, and it turns out that there weren't too many of those. That actually other extinctions seem to correlate better with a lot of volcanism, a lot of volcanic activity. And so the kind of alternate idea for the extinction of the dinosaurs is that it was volcanic activity throwing up gases, kind of creating a greenhouse.
Rapid warming.
Rapid warming.
Sure.
And so there are all these volcanics that were going on in India. And so that the alternative has been, that's what caused it, and the meteorite was just kind of icing on the cake, but the timing of that doesn't seem to work out as well.
Interesting.
So most of the volcanism was actually after the meteorite. So
Wow.
anyway,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
yeah.
That's cool. What was I going to ask you? Damn.
I don't know. Must have been a good question.
It was a great question. Holy crap. No, it was not extinction. Oh my gosh. It is gone.
It'll come to you as soon as this
Yeah,
is.
of course it's over. As soon as I hit end, it's gonna come back to me. It was about the extinction. That theory was in the 80s, you said?
Yeah, so I was actually at Berkeley when it came out. The Alvarez's. So it was basically Walter Alvarez was a geologist, and his father was a nuclear physicist. And so, he found all this iridium, Walter did, at the extinction level in Italy, and then he said, "Hey, Dad, what's going on?"
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Help me.
His father brought that forward. So they had this, basically all this cosmic dust. Why was all this cosmic dust there at the boundary?
Because there's always you always get this iridium, but in very small amounts.
Yeah.
Because it's always kind of raining down on Earth, and it gets kind of mixed in with the sediments. So he was actually out there looking at the iridium as a way to tell how fast the sediment was piling up. So he gets up to the boundary at the very end of the Cretaceous, and all of a sudden there's a huge amount of iridium. And then it goes back to just the little bits of iridium. So it's like, why is there this huge spike in iridium right at this point, right? So how do you get that much iridium, right? And the way they came up with is there had to have been a huge meteor impact, bringing all that iridium in and spreading it out in the atmosphere
there's more
at one
iridium.
point in time.
There's more iridium in meteorites than there is on planet
Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Man, I don't even know how you would to think of that. Have you guys heard of LiDAR before?
Yes.
Sure.
Is that something that can be used for paleontology?
When I was working in Western China a while ago, National Geographic was funding me, and they really liked LiDAR because it's really picturesque.
Sure.
And so they said, "Oh, Jim, why don't you use LiDAR there?" And I looked into it, and it was like, well, it doesn't really get us what we want. Basically, it produces this spectacular image of, very fine resolution of a big area that you're working in.
Yeah.
And so, that's nice, but we already knew kind of what we needed to know about those. And it's a lot of trouble. It used to be a lot of trouble anyways. You had to set up all these stands around there with the cameras, and I think it's easier now.
It's definitely easier now. They're using it in the Amazon right now and they're literally finding like cities in the Amazon from that were like extinct or whatever, and then they're finding out that like the soil, like there's no way that like plants or something like that could have been made in the soil because there's some sort of chemical in it. So they're saying it is like man-made. Like the Amazon's basically man-made. Yeah, but anyway, I would think LiDAR would be.
Well, with LiDAR, so the thing is, all the fossils we're looking at are under the surface. What the LiDAR is showing you the surface.
Yes.
And so that's the limitation. All we were going to use it for is the geology.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, actually, I got into a discussion when I was talking to these satellite imaging folks, and one of the guys was like, "Oh, this should be able to tell you where the dinosaurs
Yeah.
are."
Like,
The guy there who knew more about it said, "No, it's
yeah.
where the dinosaurs are."
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
me. That's cool, man. Yeah. Well, do you guys got anything else you want to talk about, or anything that's like, oh man, wait a minute, I didn't talk about that.
Um,
Nah.
No.
I could talk for hours.
I know.
Yeah.
I think we covered a lot of really cool stuff. It's been over an hour, so that's good. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for wanting to have this conversation with me and let me pick your brain about dinosaurs. I learned a ton that I didn't know. So, if anything, I learned something. So, thank you again. I appreciate you guys, and you guys have a good day. That's another episode for the E4 Explicit podcast.
Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely.